I have some bad news for you. This kind of learning that you're doing right now, where you listen to me talk and try to remember what I say, is the worst possible way for a human being to learn. Sorry about that. Even if we are super focused on what a speaker is telling us, we'll inevitably only retain a tiny percentage of the information we get from passively watching or listening. That's because the way that human beings are wired to learn is by doing things. We learn best the way we first learned when we were children, by tasting, touching, smelling, creating, singing, dancing, acting, and exploring. And that's exactly what the Jewish holidays do for us. The holidays teach us Judaism's most important stories, ideas, and values through active, engaging experiences that utilize all of our senses. Instead of just learning about the past, we dive into the stories by eating symbolic foods or lighting candles or building a hut in our backyard and shaking a bunch of branches in it or dressing in costume and having a party. We take these old stories and by doing these actions, make them our own. The three most important holidays to our biblical ancestors came at the three primary harvest seasons of the year. Pesach, or Passover in English, comes in the spring. Shavuot at the start of the summer. And the biggest holiday of them all, Sukkot, in the fall. On these three festivals, known collectively as the Shalosh Regalim, or three pilgrimage holidays, our mostly farmer ancestors would give thanks for another successful crop by bringing a portion of their harvest to the temple in Jerusalem. As Judaism matured, these three harvest festivals took on a deeper layer of meaning. They came to also represent the three most significant events in the core story arc of the Torah. Pesach commemorates the exodus of our ancestors from slavery in Egypt. Shavuot recalls the revelation at Mount Sinai, the giving of the commandments that teach us how to live a Jewish life. And Sukkot celebrates the journey of the Israelites across the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. Exodus, Sinai, journey, year after year after year. Pesach is a great example of a holiday that doesn't just tell us a compelling story, it helps us to experience it with all of our senses. The British Jewish author Israel Zangwill said that on Passover, Jews eat their history. He's totally right. Rather than just saying that we left Egypt in a hurry, so fast that we didn't even give our bread time to rise, we spend the week eating matzah, crackers that are baked from beginning to end in less than 18 minutes. Rather than just saying that we had it rough in Egypt, we eat pungent, bitter herbs that make our eyes water and dip our greens into salt water that's supposed to remind us of the taste of tears. At various points in the Passover Seder, we sing our story in songs like Dayenu. We act our story out as Persian Jews do when they pretend to whip each other with green onions, mocking our ancient taskmasters. We sit around the table and discuss and debate and interpret our story until we know it from every conceivable angle and come to identify with it deeply for ourselves. 50 days later, we celebrate Shavuot, recalling the revelation at Mount Sinai. How do we try to recapture a bit of the magic of that dramatic holy moment? The tradition says that the Torah was given at midnight. So we stay up as late as we can on Shavuot Eve, studying, filling ourselves with Torah. Synagogues and other Jewish institutions hold classes all night long on Shavuot, sometimes running literally until dawn. Well, Rabbi Louis Finkelstein, one of the great Talmud scholars of the 20th century, said, "When I pray, I'm talking to God. But when I study, that's when God talks back to me." It may not be the same as the voice of God booming from out of a sky full of lightning and thunder and smoke like it's described in the book of Exodus. But for the people of the book, the act of opening up a text and learning it together is about as close to the voice of God as we're likely to get. And in the fall, we have our most experiential holiday of all. Instead of just reading about the 40 years that our ancestors wandered in the wilderness, we leave our homes for a week each fall and live a little bit like them. We spend all our time in a sukkah, a purposefully fragile structure meant to be put up and taken down by hand. The roof, which must be made of purely natural materials, needs to be open enough that we can look up and see the stars. Eating, sleeping, or just sitting in the sukkah, maybe you can imagine yourself as an escaping slave on the journey to a better life. Maybe you can look up through the leafy ceiling and sense that our ancestors looked up and saw the light shining down on them from the exact same stars. Another fun tradition associated with Sukkot also carries us back to very ancient times. The Torah tells us that during this holiday, we're supposed to take a palm branch, a willow branch, and a myrtle branch, and form them into a bundle called a lulav. And then we're supposed to take an etrog fruit, which is kind of an oversized lemon called in English a citron, and we're supposed to rejoice with them. Well, the rabbis interpret that to mean that we should take this bundle and shake them in the 4 directions, front and back and side to side, as well as up and down. Sukkot is the fall harvest festival. And what does a farmer need most of all at the end of the fall harvest? Rain. That's what. Lots of it. If it doesn't rain in the winter, there isn't likely to be a next year's spring, summer, or fall harvest. So what would we call this ancient ritual of waving the lulav and the etrog all around? It's sort of our people's rain dance. A bit of old school magic meant to summon the heavy winter clouds. We still shake the lulav and the etrog for the same reason that we eat matzah and bitter herbs on Passover or study late into the night on Shavuot. It's an experience that transports us to a different time and place and reminds us that we stand in the long line of ancestors going back thousands of years. At the end of Sukkot, we tag on one more holiday, added later, post-biblically, by the rabbis. The holiday is called Simchat Torah, and it's my favorite day of the whole year. Simchat Torah marks the annual completion of the Torah reading cycle, in which we read 1/52nd of the Torah each week on Shabbat, so that we can complete the whole scroll each year. On Simchat Torah, we read the last words from the book of Deuteronomy, and then immediately roll all the way back to read the first lines of Genesis. And then we have a mad, crazy dance party with the Torah, typically with an open bar, celebrating that we've completed another year's journey through its stories. Simchat Torah doesn't just wrap up the annual Torah reading cycle. It concludes the 3-part cycle of the Shalosh Regalim: Exodus, Sinai, journey, roll back to the beginning, and start all over again. Over and over again for a lifetime. You know, there are some stories that only get told once, and then you just move on to a new one. But the best stories get told over and over again, and what changes isn't the story, it's us. And those kind of stories, those stories aren't just told, they're lived. That's what the Jewish holidays do for us. They allow us to live out our stories, to walk in the footsteps of our ancestors, even to dance in their footsteps, again and again and again.
Nay,